I'd like to give an update on what's happening in the Sigeman Cup in Sweden. Remember this very strong classical all-play-all tournament featuring Magnus Carlsen, world number 1. But he's got his work cut out. There's very decent opposition, including Nodibek Absatorov, who's really on tremendous form at the moment. In this video, I'd like to show you 2 games from round 4. Van Foreest against Carlsen, and the finish to Erdogmus against Grandelius. Now, coming back to Magnus Carlsen, he was sharing the lead after 3 rounds. 2 draws and a win, pretty solid. In round 3, he drew against Absatorov, so that was quite a test, but a very tight game. He didn't really get very much out of the opening, but still a big test for him, considering that he hasn't been playing much classical chess at all. So, how would he get on against Van Foreest? Well, Van Foreest, former second of Magnus Carlsen actually. They know each other very well. And he's a little bit younger than Carlsen. And he's on very good form in 2026. He's been working very hard and he's been climbing up the rankings. So this was quite a test for Carlsen. He was playing with black as well. So has Carlsen still got it? Let's find out. Jorden van Foreest started with e4 and Carlsen showed that he was up for a fight. He went for a Sicilian and the Najdorf variation. So we saw that he risked a Benoni against Grandelius and now he's risking a Najdorf against Van Foreest. And the Dutchman was obviously prepared for this and played f4 very quickly. It's a move that was in fashion quite a lot in the 1980s, but other moves took over. So this is a test for Carlsen because somehow he might not have been expecting this particular variation. And indeed, he thought for 8 minutes in this position before he went for e5. Now, many moves possible here. Knight d7, queen c7, e6, g6. I used to enjoy playing g6 actually, but she's very provocative. White can actually play e5 there. But anyway, e5 is a standard move as well. Knight b3 and Carlsen again, I think, 5 minutes. Played bishop e7 and pretty quickly Van Foreest exchanged on e5 and went for the endgame. And again, Carlsen thought for 7 minutes over bishop takes d8. And in this position, he thought for 25 minutes before playing bishop e6. Now, he's already consumed so much time to get to this position. And, you know, he was already on the back foot, basically. And quickly, Van Foreest got some initiative here. Knight c5. Again, a 9-minute think with bishop a5. Now it was Van Foreest's turn to have a big think. 35 minutes over bishop d3. I mean, this is actually a new move. Or bishop a5 is a new move. It's interesting to see, actually, that Sindarov had played this with white last year. In last year's Sigeman Cup. Sindarov against Lamy. Lamy played b5 and lost. So a few key players have been playing this variation, but clearly this caught out Carlsen and he was very much improvising. And well, pretty quickly Van Foreest turned his lead in development into a very nice initiative. So you can see that white's pawns are a mess here. However, he does have the 2 bishops, and this open b4, semi-open b file, is a bit of a problem for black. Rook b1, and Carlsen took on e4, and rook takes b7. Now, again, let's come back to the pawn structure. Black has this typical Sicilian structure where these kingside pawns are really, really good. And if black were developed here, if the king was safe, then I would say black has the better position. But because white is so active, this is a problem. And basically, yeah, this black is struggling here. Carlsen is struggling. And after this move, knight c6, really nice move. Using these active pieces, you have to. I mean, if white doesn't play with vigor here, then black will just be better. But knight c6 is a problem. Of course, Carlsen would like to castle, but then there's a knight fork. So Carlsen had to give up the exchange. And now he's worse. No doubt about it. But this is still a very tricky position because, these are not great pawns, and Carlsen has some stability in the center with these nice knights and a compact pawn structure. However, the king can be hassled. Now, this is a very long game, but basically Van Foreest played pretty well, and he always had the advantage, and he managed to simplify the position, and they got to this position. So rook and pawn against knight and 2 pawns. Now, if this knight can successfully link up with the king side, let's say if we sat the knight on f6, this would be a stone cold draw. The problem is that this knight is a little bit out on a limb. After knight f5 check, king g4, the knight stepped away. You can't play knight d6 here because of rook e6 check winning the knight. Carlsen played knight d4, but after this, the knight had to run across to the other side of the board. Knight c6 would run into rook e6 check. You can see this is the issue. So Carlsen had to play knight b5, and then after rook c4, basically the knight can't be won, but it's stuck on that side of the board. Again, knight d6 runs into a terrible pin, rook c6. So the king had to step back, and this knight is corralled. The horse is corralled on this side of the board. You can see these squares are covered, and the knight just can't get back. Now, if the king could run across to take that knight, then of course it would just be winning. But in the meantime, you've got to watch out for the counterplay on the king side. So this is the game continuation. So it's a very long game. We're already at move 70. And Carlsen is finding counterplay with his kingside pawns. Now, the computer assesses this as still level. But in a practical game, in fact, I mean, what a computer says about this position is pretty irrelevant. Basically, white has winning chances, black has drawing chances, but it is so difficult to play this accurately. So, for example, here, the computer says knight a7 is a draw. Well, very difficult to determine exactly why. So, again, there are problems with the king and the knight. So if king takes pawn, then rook check wins the knight. Okay, we're now at move 80, a very long game, and the players were running short of time. They're playing on increment, basically, and it's impossible to play this position accurately when you're so short of time. So here's another situation where, yeah, these pins and double attacks are the issue. So king takes pawn, rook b3 check, wins the knight. Knight c4, rook b4 pins and wins. And Carlsen played g4. Now it looks like he's making good progress to hold this. But it's a win for white now. So if g3, then rook g2 picks up the pawn, and then you go back and pick up the knight. So king h5. And in this position, Van Foreest plays rook a2, but apparently the computer says this is a blunder. The computer says king f5 is the winning move. But rook a2 played. Knight c4, rook c2. And Carlsen can still draw this. So, okay, maybe we should have a think and drink moment here. So if you were playing with black, how would you draw this position? I mean, this is impossible. If you're just going to guess at this, well, good luck. But anyway, you have a think, I'll have a drink, and I'll see you in a moment. Black to play and draw. Cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month, you get a newsletter with a test game, calculation puzzles, a monthly opening survey, access to an archive with over 100 opening surveys. And you can join in live masterclasses exclusive to patrons, where you can ask me questions directly over Zoom. All for only $25 per month. Do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and join the club. This is such a difficult position. Carlsen went back with knight a3. Blunder. He should play knight b6. If you played knight b6, many congratulations. Okay, let's see why. So if rook c5 check here, rook g5, king h3. If rook takes g4, then the knight returns, and knight h5. And I mean, it still looks really unpleasant for black, but this is actually a draw now, the databases will tell you. Or rook h5 check, king takes g4. Now, if white has a couple of moves here to bring the king across, or perhaps the rook manages to control the knight, then it's a draw. But after knight c4, king f4, knight d2, the knight gets back just in time to link up with the king. But I mean, even that's pretty scary. So, you know, playing this with very little time is so difficult. Carlsen played knight a3 instead. Rook c3. Now, if knight b5, okay, I can work that one out. Rook c5 check wins the knight. So the knight has to go back to b1. And then rook d3, and that was the final move of the game. Carlsen resigned. Now, you can see that the rook controls all the knight moves. So king h4. Okay, how does white win? Well, in this case, also pretty easy. Rook d1. Threatening the knight and also threatening checkmate. So, yeah, that's the end of that, basically. And there just isn't a better move. I mean, such a difficult game. Such a difficult game. But you have to ask yourself, if Carlsen had more time, well, maybe he could have worked things out. But he suffered in the opening. You know, he'd already consumed an hour on the clock after, you know, just a dozen moves. And that puts the pressure on you. And, you know, he was worse straight out of this opening. So clearly Van Foreest knew what he was doing, had prepared extremely well. But Carlsen, well, his rustiness in classical chess, I'm afraid, showed in this game. There was a typically cheeky tweet from Anish Giri He said, "I'm ready to sell my Najdorf candidates files for a lot of Norwegian krones, or Danish, whichever more convenient. 6F4 is included there." And he CC'd PH, that's Peter Heine Nielsen, Carlsen's second. Well, indeed, if Carlsen was more in the swing of things, he would have had opening files, and he would know this. But, well, he's testing himself, but I'm afraid he failed the test today. Or yesterday, anyway. Okay, let's move on. So I really like to show you the game between Jars Khan Erdogmus and Niels Grandelius. So Erdogmus doing pretty well. He was on 2 out of 3 going into round 4. And, well, he had a wild game against Niels Grandelius, who is suffering in the tournament at the moment. I want to show you this finish. So Grandelius could take this pawn here with a rook, and it's a pretty strange position. I mean, roughly level according to material. Erdogmus said he would have played knight e4 here, and then, you know, something like this. So the knights protect each other, but white does not have a passed pawn. And the rooks are very active. Machine says it's roughly level, but I mean anything. I think all 3 results are possible actually in this position. Knights are very tricky, but that's what Grandelius should do. Instead, Grandelius took on d6 with the pawn. So it looks like he's somehow trying to control this knight, but this was a terrible mistake because there's a lovely move here, knight d5, and this turns the game completely in white's favour. So first of all, if rook takes knight, then knight f6 check wins the rook, and it's difficult to bring this rook into the game successfully. Rook e8, then again there's a knight fork, well, either knight. And this knight does a fantastic job of controlling that rook actually. It can't come to b8. And, you know, even if it's attacked, well, it's not attacked because there's knight f6 check. And this gives white the chance to bring in the rook, and there is absolutely no defense to this attack with rook and 2 knights. So watch what happens here. Knight f4. Closing in for the kill, rook c8. So this is a nice bit of prophylaxis before the final assault. And here we go. The rook goes in. And knight f6. Now, if the king pops out, so yeah, there are all kinds of threats now because, yeah, there's a threat of here and then checking, and the rook hangs. So the rook moved out. Knight e6. So now it's even mate is threatened. And after g5, knight f8 controls this square. And on the next turn, rook h7, checkmate. I mean, that's a fantastic attack with the 2 knights and a rook. And Jars Khan Erdogmus now leads the tournament. Let's take a look at the tournament standings after 4 rounds. So Erdogmus with 3 out of 4. Fantastic performance so far. Remember, he's just 14 years old. Then Van Foreest, Abdusatorov and Eric Geisy all on 2.5. Carlsen on 50% along with Andy Woodward. And Jorden beat Andy Woodward and is on 1.5. Niels Grandelius, 4 zeros so far. So, fascinating second half of the tournament in prospect. 3 rounds still to play. Can Carlsen catch up? Can Erdogmus win the tournament to basically, this would be the tournament of his life. if he wins this one. So I'll try to keep you updated over the next couple of days.